Yes, it's standard rate. Every expert will be paid.
So after giving all these conclusions in trial today, that's when you'll be paid by any partner.
I actually have been paid for my work, and I'm also being paid after this, yes.
Dr. Solo, you mentioned a lot about these risk factors.
Yes.
The ones that you found present in Jesse Duran were the presence in the media, or presence of violence in the media,
Yes,
presence of a firearm,
absolutely.
and those, you would say, takes one risk factor to show any sort of risk of violence. Isn't that true?
I'm sorry, could you clarify?
You would say if any person were to have even one risk factor present, they would pose a risk of violence. Isn't that true?
Sure. There's always an indication of violence, but Jesse showed 3 out of the 6 potential.
Right. And on this chart, you mentioned this "Me and My Gun" cartoon.
Yes.
May I approach the bench to retrieve evidence?
You may.
The cartoon.
I.
In this cartoon, you show that there's a gun. Isn't that true?
Yes.
In this 5th panel, Jesse's pointing a gun.
Yeah, at other students.
You don't see any bullets in this picture, do you?
No.
You don't know if this gun's loaded.
No, but the fact of inducing a panic simply by pointing a gun at other children is cause for concern.
And he says the bad kids. Is that right?
It does, but it's kids.
So you would say that it's possible that if Jesse were bullied, he'd be defending himself by scaring the bad kids away. Isn't that true?
Yes, but inducing a panic with a gun isn't a proper way to take care of a bullying situation.
However, you also say that over here that Jesse wanted to play with a real gun, right?
Yes.
You've never found any evidence that he wanted to ever use a gun?
No, just that he wanted to play with one.
Simply playing with a gun. And that is how you came to find that he had a risk of violence, is that he wanted to play with a gun.
Along with the fights in school, that was another warning factor that accompanied the diagnosis, yes.
Well, those fights in school didn't involve any guns, did they?
No, but they were fights. They were violent fights.
But without guns.
No, there's no need for guns to be violent.
So you have no evidence that Jesse Duran ever wanted to use a real gun or ever had used a real gun before.
Well, I know that Jesse wanted to play with a real gun, but no, I have no evidence that says that Jesse had used a real gun before.
May I approach the bench to return evidence?
Yes, thank you.
And may I retrieve another piece of evidence of the email? Now, you also used this email in your evaluation, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
This email is from Hayden Duran to her friend Casey French.
Yes.
In this, it says, "Thank goodness we don't have any guns in the house," right?
Yes, that was one of the lines in the email.
And yet, you still say that Jesse was in the presence of a firearm.
Absolutely. There was a firearm next door at the Parks that both Hayden and Jesse were aware of. Hayden was forewarned of this firearm, and Jesse was also aware of that firearm. So the presence was there.
So, because of Jesse's awareness, he was in the presence of it.
Absolutely.
May I return to this document to the bench?
Yes, thank you.
No. Dr. Solo, you mentioned this presence of a firearm. Would you say that if somebody actually lives in the same house as a firearm, then they're also in the presence of a firearm?
Absolutely.
Possibly even more so than somebody who's simply aware of that gun?
Yes,
Sydney Park lived in that home, didn't she?
she did.
So she was in the presence of a firearm, wasn't she?
Yes.
So she posed one risk factor, isn't that right?
Yes.
You would also say that if Sydney Park were to play the same video games as Jesse Duran, she would also pose the same risk of violence in the media.
Not exactly. It depends on the amount of exposure. See, Jesse Duran was actually given these games by Hayden Duran, and actually Hayden Duran encouraged Jesse to play them by playing them with Jesse, whereas Sydney was limited towards the content that she was given. Although she did play the games, it was not on the same level in which Jesse played them.
Dr. Solo, regardless how much she played these games, she did play these games nonetheless.
She did.
So she did see violence in the media.
Yes, but it's ultimately about the amount of exposure to violence in the media. There's violence everywhere in the media. Commercials, TV shows, but when you facilitate the violence, it's a different story.
But specifically, you chose that Jesse Duran had posed a risk of violence because of presence in the media because of those video games, isn't that right?
Because he was given those video games to play.
So because he was given video games, therefore he had violence in the media present in his life.
An excessive exposure to violence in the media, yes.
You didn't take into account the fact that he played these games?
All the time, I did.
So then you also must consider that Sydney Park played these games as well.
Yes, but it was not nearly to the extent that Jesse played them. Jesse played them all the time, whereas Sydney played them on occasion.
You mentioned at the beginning of your direct examination that parents have an obligation to protect their children and do what's necessary to prevent them from violence. Isn't that true?
Yes.
So Jesse Duran, in the case of Jesse, you would say Hayden Duran should have done parental obligations to prevent violence in Jesse's part. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. Whereas what I found was that Hayden Duran ultimately facilitated the violence.
Well, Dr. Solo, you know that Hayden Duran talked with Jesse about the dangers of guns. Isn't that true?
Yes, but talk.
And you would say that that was good on her part.
Yes, that was a proper step towards where she needed to go, but she ultimately said herself that she wasn't even sure if she got through to Jesse.
Right, so you would also say that Andy Park had the same obligation as a parent to Sydney as Hayden does with Jesse. Isn't that true?
If Andy Park had been aware that this extensive play had been happening, then yes, I would say the same.
Right, so if Andy Park was aware of the necessity to protect her daughter from violence, she would have had the same obligation as Hayden Duran. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. From what I saw, she took better steps towards that than Hayden Duran did.
However, you didn't do an evaluation on Andy Park, so you don't know those steps, do you?
No, I don't know all of the steps, but I have seen through my review of her affidavit and things of other people's affidavits that there were limits put on Sydney's exposure and that there were not limits put on Jesse's exposure.
There weren't limits on Jesse's exposure, but didn't you say that Hayden Duran took away the video games of Jesse?
For 5 days, but ultimately gave them back after 3 fights.
Right, but you would say that Hayden Duran did limit the exposure, especially for this period of time.
I guess you could say that. But ultimately, she gave the games to Jesse, which is the exact opposite of limiting exposure.
So Dr. Solo, in your professional opinion, it's possible that if Sydney Park posed 2 of the 6 risk factors, she would have posed a risk of violence in Andy Park's home. Isn't that true?
There's a potential, but it wouldn't have been to the same extent that Jesse did. Jesse showed 3 of the 6, the 3 that directly pertain to the child themselves. The other 3 are external environmental factors. So, Jesse posed all 3 that are personal to the child.
Dr. Solo, you mentioned this extent, but these 6 risk factors are based on if they're present or if they're not present.
Correct.
Evaluation, right?
Mhm.
So regarding that, it doesn't matter how extensive the presence was. Isn't that true?
It's a regard to if they're there, but we take into account that it does go by amount.
It does go by amount, and yet you base this presence based on a yes or a no question, right?
A yes or a no by amount, yes.
So if it was present in Jesse Duran, it'd be a yes.
Yes.
And same with Sydney Park. If it was present even a little bit, it would be yes.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter the extent necessarily, does it?
It doesn't, but we do weigh it at the end.
Right. So Andy Park, assuming Sydney Park had this presence in has had these risks of violence, would have had the parental obligation to protect her daughter from undue violence. Isn't that true?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
May I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, this is pertaining specifically to Andy Park's obligation as a parent, as the previous questions I've asked have pertained to the similarity with Hayden Duran's parenting, her obligations.
I respond.
Specifically, these are Andy Park's obligations.
You may.
Opposing counsel has asked this witness 2 times already whether or not Ms. Park had an obligation to be a proper parent to her daughter. And the witness has already stated that the obligation is present. This is the 3rd time he's asking the question.
Your Honor, I've not asked this question 3 times. This specifically goes to whether or not Dr. Solo believes that Andy Park, based on the fact that these risks of violence were present, had that obligation. That specific question was not asked.
I will give you one chance, and one chance only overruled,
Yes, Your Honor.
then you need to move on.
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Solo, just to clarify for the jury, if these risks of violence were present in Sydney Park, then an obligation for Andy Park is present. Isn't that true?
If an outside party were to make Andy Park aware of some sort of violent behavior in Sydney Park, then I would agree that she would need a duty of care. Hayden Duran was given warnings, was told, was given a notification, was told by multiple parents, was given an explicit comment from a babysitter. All of these factors show that Hayden Duran should have taken these actions to correct the violent behavior. That was present and aware from Jesse Duran.
Now, Dr. Solo, just to wrap up these 6 factors, you created these 6 factors, didn't you?
Yes, they are what I use.
And they are a little bit peer-reviewed, and yet it's not an actual method, is it?
No, it's simply 6 factors that we look for when diagnosing these violent tendencies.
6 factors you look for.
Oh, yes, and as you said, it's peer reviewed.
However, this is not standard in your field, these 6 factors.
No, but it is it's peer reviewed, it's been, rated multiple times, 4.8 out of 5, it has perfect scores, I use it quite often.
Thank you, Dr. Solo. I have nothing further.